This is the Educational Triage Podcast. Welcome. We invite you to come along with us on an exploration of interviews, issues, and other exciting and relevant topics in education, especially alternative education. They say alternative education is a laboratory for mainstream education. Why? Well, join us every week and listen in as Christy Goodell,
hello,
Philip Summers,
Aloha,
and I, Tony Hunt, jump in feet first to discuss issues that may affect our classes, students, communities, as well as our teaching. Please subscribe if you enjoy and find relevance in what you experience here. And if you haven't left a quick review, please do. We appreciate your candor and insights so we can improve as we move forward. Now, let's see what's on board today. And welcome back to Educational Triage. And this week, we are going to have a discussion about funding and equity in funding, because a lot of the private programs, a lot of the other programs that aren't necessarily in the regular mainstream programs or the schools do not receive the kinds of monies that they really should be receiving, and not through fault of their own, but it seems, and as we heard in our cast 2 weeks ago with Liz Quayle and Annie Marges, that we really should be getting far more resources in our alternative education programs and schools than we actually do, maybe 1.5%. Like we do for special ed. But I have a bit of an expert here, and I have Roxanne with me.
Thank you. It's very good to be here with you, Tony.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you, and I really am grateful that you agreed to do this with me. Roxanne Wilson runs a program in a rural community in Oregon, and she and I were talking, and she brought up in a couple of meetings about how there were some issues with the ESSA funds and over COVID, and the fact that she falls into a weird little spot where she's a private program that cannot receive public funds, but she's also funded publicly. But since she's a private school, am I saying that right, or did I confuse myself? Okay.
No, that's pretty. It's pretty close. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that we would begin with please describe what your program is, and then we kind of know and take us through how the funding happens through the funding that you get, and then what would equitable funding look like for your school, because your students are more, they have a higher need for resources than a lot of the regular mainstream, let's call them middle class normed students, correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Which is the case with most alternative programs.
Right.
And one way or another. Mm-hmm.
So let's hear about your school, and then what kind of funding you do receive, and then what it would take for you to feel whole with equitable funding.
Okay.
Let's just begin with that.
Yeah. So first of all, we are, our parent company is a nonprofit organization, headquartered in McMinnville, Oregon. And then we own and operate a therapeutic focused virtual alternative school and program in Dayton, rural Dayton, Oregon. And we specifically serve students who are not able to succeed in the traditional environment because of the barriers of the mental health challenges they experience. And so that includes anxiety, depression, even up to and including suicidality.
Okay. So that tends to be the focus of where your program comes from. So are you able to provide them with different mental health services? And
yes.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yes, we have their what do you call those? I just had a my brain just kind of went on left field. But the assessments, yes, mental health assessments, we have them done with by our psychiatrist, who's the medical director, and then um, we have our 504 program that we through Frontline that we use, and we work with this school district. Oh, there you are, to implement whatever all of what they all of their needs, but we specifically focus on on the mental health needs. But we do it in a way that we're supporting the whole person and their family. So we provide peer services for the parents as well, and family stabilization services. We work with Lutheran Family Services to provide those things, and so we have a lot of partnerships in the community and throughout the state that we utilize to find the best resources for our families.
And how, out of curiosity, how linked in are those families? I mean, are they pretty well clicked in, or is it sort of happenstance?
Um, we've had we've had all of both sides and everything in between.
Okay.
And so what we have learned is that there are different levels of needs for the students, and there's different levels of needs for the parents and for the families, and it really has to be student centered and focused on individual needs. And
Hmm.
then we create a service plan and um, provide all this. If we don't have the services that they require or that they could benefit from, then we reach out to our community and find them for them. And so
Okay.
basically, we do a lot of resource gathering and walking with our peers hand in hand to go. I mean, not really physically holding their hand, but
Right.
we walk with them to go to access services. We will attend meetings, first meetings if we need to with the families. We will pretty much do whatever they need
Hmm.
to ensure the success of their students and their
Okay.
family together.
And then what kind of funding do you receive from the district?
From the
Because
district.
from
So
the
far,
district.
we have only received what is in our contract, uh, which is 80% of the net operating expenditures per student. And that is
Mhm.
only what is reported from the general expenditure fund, not any other extra funding.
Right. Because in Oregon, it's either 80% or the net cost of expenditure for the student in the program, whichever is less.
Right.
Correct?
And ours will never be less. So they don't even ask us for that anymore because I mean, psychiatry for 1 hour is $150 at least, it's usually, or 200.
Hmm.
And so like just 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 the mental health services alone far exceed what we get from the district.
Okay. So, because if you're going to get, let's say that you had them all in special ed, would you be able to get more monies for them if they were to fall
Perhaps.
under that?
However, the problem with that is that special education, as I'm sure you know, doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily follow the student. The funding doesn't necessarily always follow the student because each district is only the way I have been told from the district that I work with, each and from individuals that I have spoken to from ODEs, um, that there's only they only get a certain percentage for the district for special education services based on IEPs, and they don't cover anything on a 504 plan, which is what's usually used for mental health
Hmm.
challenges. They don't Special education doesn't even apply to mental health challenges on a 504 plan at all, and they only cover a certain amount of special education. I mean, needs a percent in each district, and once they reach that cap, everything else is just absorbed into their budget. And so, unfortunately, that specific law or policy or whatever it is it, um, that creates that
That's stream.
funding cycle, that funding stream, is actually creating a situation where educate or administrators in public school districts are reluctant to put their students on IEPs, because then they are required by law to provide services that they're not always compensated for.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, the problem, I think, is more systemic than just in the school districts themselves, because they have to look out for, how well they can pay their educators, just like we do,
Right.
and their services, how well they can provide the services for their students. And so I believe that, most educators and administrators want what's best for their students. But if you can't pay for the services, then that's not going to help anybody.
Exactly. Okay. So if you were to receive equitable funding, if you were to receive funding that was, let's say, that allowed you to be comfortable, much like the mainstream schools, let's say that they're at a comfortable level. If you receive full funding, would that make it comfortable, or would you need more than just what's there?
Well, if you think about it like this, so if you take so every need that a student has a cost associated to meeting it,
Mm-hmm.
associated with meeting that need, right?
Right.
So if you're talking about what you were talking about earlier, the mainstream normal middle class needs, right,
Mm-hmm.
without the issues that come with poverty or the issues that come with anything else, right, just the mainstream middle of the road, right, the
Mm-hmm.
median, I guess you would say, or the
Right.
mean, the average, then there's a cost associated to meeting those normal needs,
Mm-hmm.
right? um Average. But when you're talking about individuals who are needing to go to an alternative school because they're not able to succeed in the traditional environment with those average needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
That means they need more things than what's being provided in the traditional school environment. They need more,
Right.
but we get less.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that doesn't seem, I mean, that's kind of the opposite of equitable.
You think?
Yeah. So, and then when you go to the Department of Education, and I am not throwing stones here at all, because I love them. They have been really, really supportive. But you go to the Department of Education and you say, okay, why am I getting denied for ESSER funds? I mean, I'm only asking for funds for 5 students right now, right? So why am I
Mm-hmm.
getting denied with these ESSER funds? Well, whether it's an amount issue, let's get past that. And maybe the amount we asked for was not the amount we were supposed to, whatever, because I'm brand new at that. So, but the bottom line was, they said that because we were, like you said, we were a private alternative school, we were not eligible to receive public relief funds. But because we were receiving public funds from the district, we were not eligible to receive private relief funds. So there were 38, I think, and I might be getting the number wrong, but I believe they said there was like 30 something schools in Oregon that fall into the category that where we were at in this
Mm-hmm.
little, basically where we fell through the gap.
Mm-hmm.
And
Private
our
control school.
students of those 30 something schools, alternative schools in Oregon, were the only students who in the whole state who did not benefit from relief funds from COVID. And they were the ones that were most likely suffering the most from the effects of COVID.
Right. And those are the private contract schools, the ones that
Right.
are private, but they contract with the school districts to receive 80%. So
Yes.
they fall into the same little net that you do.
Yes.
And
And
they
they said
serve,
that like there's nothing we can do about it because these are federal guidelines.
those are federal
Okay.
guidelines, or are
That's
they
what they
state,
said. The
or is it
federal
state policy?
guidelines. They said that they are following federal guidelines and there's nothing they can do about it. And so I said, okay, so who makes the federal guidelines? Who do I need to go to next? And that was not something that was not information that was readily available. So, you know, to me personally, there's nothing I can do about it is never an appropriate response.
Right.
Because this is just the way it's done, not appropriate. Because it's
No,
all the way it's always been, not
not
appropriate.
appropriate. Hmm.
No. When there are students suffering and they are often individuals with disabilities and they are being they are the only students not benefiting from these funds in the whole state, that seems a little discriminatory to me.
It's exclusionary.
Exclusionary. And whether that's intentional or not, there's nothing I can do about it is not appropriate.
Right.
Let's talk about what we can do about it because
Hmm.
nothing is not appropriate.
Exactly. Exactly. That's why I thought it was important for you to come on here and speak, because I know that you are presenting on this at the national conference in St. Louis next month.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you and I had a chat about that. And I kind of like to go through for the people who are listening, because I know that what you're going to present is probably going to be look a lot different in many ways, and then there's going to be a lot of similarities that are here too. But let's talk about what sources of funding you do have and that you're able to use for your program, because I don't want people to think that the only thing that you can get are the funds from the school district.
Well, no,
And
for sure. And so that actually is one of the questions that I have had um, as alternative administrators of schools and programs, alternative schools and programs. How many of us even know what all the funding sources are that are available? And are alternative schools and programs routinely made aware of all the possible funding sources prior to signing contracts with public districts? And if not, shouldn't there be a process in place to make sure administrators in alternative education know their rights and not just their responsibilities? I mean, shouldn't those go hand in hand?
like with a almost like a data warehouse that they would need.
Yeah, or a tutorial,
Hmm.
or even a PDF that's sent to you before you sign a contract, or
Right.
suggestions on how to word your contract so that you can get all the funds that are due your students
Hmm.
and use the funding to actually help the students they were designed to help. Because if the money is not going, I'll tell you about the extra funding that you can, some of the extra funding that you can get. But if the funding is not following the students and their needs, then what is it following? I mean, and are there accountability and transparency measures in place to protect the interests of the students and their families? Did anyone receive funding for the students we have been serving in our schools and programs? And if so, where are those funds being spent if not on those specific students' education and their extra needs?
Hmm.
Where are the funds? Where'd they go?
Right.
If they're not following the students, then what's it following?
And so then it becomes suspect of fraud.
Yeah, but and I really don't think that I really I would hope, and I
Hmm.
so I'm going to think that it's an oversight and not intentional or malicious. But I think that educating districts and alternative education administrators on exactly what those funding sources are and how to distribute those funds equitably for the best interests of the students involved, that really needs to be out there. I mean, for us, we are owned and operated by a nonprofit organization. And so we can do grant writing and get some grants, and that's at the mercy. They can say yes or they can say no. So that's not ever a guaranteed. Fortunately for us, we have had some support from the Oregon Community Fund and Ford Family Foundation,
Hmm.
um, because of the super important work we do and the lives we save. But not it took me forever to learn how to speak the language of grant writing, as a grassroots nonprofit, to stop getting no's every time. So in the
Mm.
meantime, who suffers?
The students.
Right.
Well, it seems to me, and maybe this feels as though I'm going off on another track. Part of me believes that part of a senior year curriculum and one of the requirements for graduation from a regular mainstream high school should be filling out a FAFSA, getting at least 2 scholarships, and learning how to do scholarships or Pell Grants or whatever, and
Yeah.
doing the best you can so that you don't have to take out these onerous loans, as well as, and maybe that's the first quarter, and the second quarter of the semester would be based on grant writing
Yeah.
and learning how to grant write and write those grants simply because, um,
There's a lot of grants you can get for personal endeavors.
right. And not only that, but it's a skill that is marketable that people
True.
can use. So whether or not somebody's actually going to go out into the cold, cruel world via university or trade or whatever, they still have that skill that's right there. And that is something for their resume that can actually
Yeah.
help them. And I think that somebody in a position like yours, if you were able to hire somebody who kind of sort of even knew what they were doing, and then you could put your head together with theirs, that would double the fun in trying to get everything together as well.
Yes, actually, yes. I actually ask them for their input when I do grant writing nowadays. I'm like, so,
Hmm.
how does this? What benefits you, and what are what is the biggest? What has had the biggest impacts on your experience? And those are the things that we want to fund specifically,
Hmm.
because we want to keep providing the services that work, the
Right.
services that honestly save lives, and not just
Hmm.
save them, but not just not just get people to not just get these kiddos to not want to die anymore, but get them to really want to live, to build a life and to build skills that help them deal with the things that life throw at us, to be able to have a life they want to live, that they look forward to. They start
Give,
thinking about their future for the first time.
right. Give them a path paved with hope
Yeah. And
rather
that's another
than
reason
despair.
I one of the things I also think they should and we do teach in high school is, and that's one of the things I'm going to be talking about at the national conference, is legislative advocacy,
Hmm.
because they feel powerless just like the rest of us, that like it is the way it is. I don't like it, there's nothing I can do. But we're not powerless.
No.
I've helped actually change laws myself personally. I know it can be done, and there all you have to do is know how to do it.
Hmm.
And first of all, but the first thing is, I don't know about you, but I didn't even know till I was in my 40s. I'm 48 now. I didn't even know till I was in my 40s that a regular citizen could even affect change on a legislative level at all. Nobody ever said anything about that. I'm pretty sure hardly anybody I knew at the time. Well, I mean, I talk about it all the time now, so they're probably all tired of hearing about it. But but before, I didn't know anything like that. They didn't know anything. I didn't know anybody that knew anything about the fact that we could actually do something about it. We're not as powerless as we thought.
Exactly. Exactly. If you know what you're saying and if you know how to approach it, then of course you're going to have ears.
Yeah, I mean, you do have to learn how to speak, and listen
Hmm.
diplomatically. I mean,
Hmm.
and those are super important skills for life that people, they just don't learn a lot. The adulting part of life.
Right. Right. So I want to get into that, but first, let's look at your sources of funding
Yeah.
because you have some different sources of funding.
I know you
Um,
had been telling me about some things that I didn't know about. Yeah.
and okay, good, good,
Hmm.
good, good, good. And
Hmm.
there's also the Education Commission of the states, and they work on educational policy and they work with the states. And you can find them on the web at ecs.org. So, and you should be able to find the representatives who are working within the Department of Education in your state
Yes.
right
Yes.
there.
Our representative has been super helpful. Um, you mentioned her earlier. You had an
Hmm.
interview with Annie Margis, and
Right.
she has been the most wonderful resource at the Oregon Department of Education. She's always there to help and support and answer questions. She never makes us feel like it's a burden. She's just been an invaluable resource, and I'm super grateful.
She seems indefatigable. So,
Oh, she's amazing. She
yeah,
really is.
she truly is. Um, okay, so sources of funding. Why don't we go through? Let's go with five that we have on our list here.
Yeah.
And so, because these are things that I think that people um, who are thinking about creating something that they might actually want to write down, maybe it's just reinforcement for some people, and other people might know. And if you know of other funding forces, funding sources, if you can shoot those into the comments, and then we can put those out there too.
Yes, please.
Um, so why don't you go through those and begin with delinquent and neglected youth?
Well, honestly, before I talked to you, I didn't know any of those resources. So I didn't, well, I knew the McKinney-Vento
Hmm.
resources for homeless youth.
Right.
I didn't know anything about the delinquent and neglected youth. And you had two other resources that you mentioned.
Hmm.
Um,
The
and
migrant education.
right.
Hmm.
And I thought there was one other one, but that I didn't know anything about those either. And I'm
There's the re-engagement.
re-engagement. Yes, that's what it was. Yes.
Hmm.
And so I had no idea those were going in there. And then you have the special education funds.
Right.
However, here's another crux of the issue. If Even if you have licensed mental health providers, you are not allowed to, it is my understanding that we are not allowed to count those as special education services, even though they are for extra or special needs, right? Um, and even contributing to significant disabilities. We're not allowed to count them as special education services if we are not specifically designated as a special education school or program.
So, what do you count those as?
We just
Are they just like jelly on toast?
extra expenses.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I did work with a. I did spend nearly 1.5 decades working with a residential treatment center, and
Hmm.
our students would go into therapy, and they would have therapeutic sessions during the day. And so we made concessions for them, but they did that off campus, and then they would walk back
Yeah.
between the house and the school and take care of things that way. So I'm just wondering, is that sort of the same kind of thing that you have, or do they just go into the in with the therapist? Or
They can have on-site or off-site services depending on what their needs are and if they're matched by what we offer.
okay.
Um, and if they sometimes they even have services in their own homes
Hmm.
that we facilitate, help get them the services and help them get started in those.
Would that be along the lines of family coaching and
And the
bringing
family
in?
stabilization
Okay.
services,
Okay.
those kinds of things. And then we have, we have peer support services for the parents, and they get those directly from us.
Hmm.
We have elder mentoring services. They get the students get those from us. We have We teach our students peer mentoring. That's actually it's actually a credit, a high school credit that they can get for peer mentoring. And they they learn teen mental health first aid and how to support each other in a safe way and how to get adults involved and safety planning, all those things.
And I believe that there may be funding for peer mentoring programs.
Oh, that would even be better.
I remember years ago when I was working as an ESL consultant, we looked into peer mentoring, and I was speaking to people from adjoining districts, and they were telling me about the funding. They told me about some of the corporations that we could speak with, and some of them were because we were looking at it wasn't Televistazo, Telemundo, or I don't know what the Spanish station is, Univision or whatever it is, because I get mixed up because I used to live in South America. So,
okay, we're gonna have to come up another conversation about that at some point because I am a culture nerd. Okay.
Oh, okay. But no, there was peer mentoring, and so it kind of goes in with. I think it's great that you do that. I also think that if the students are receiving health services, if they can put things together and it's a confidential kind of journal or something like that, and they can explain some of the progress and it doesn't have to divulge their specific needs or whatever, that I know that we were able to grant, and I know other programs grant health credits.
Oh.
Based on
health credits. Wow, that's cool.
And you could also possibly do some elective credits based on that as well. So that helps them. So if they're gone for periods of time and let's say that they're in rehab, let's say that they're in some sort of a facility for them to get their lives together, that if they can do some diaries, if they can do something and you work with the therapist maybe and them and their families, that you should be able to give them some form of elective credit for that time, so it's not completely time lost because they're working on their lives.
We include social emotional learning and all of that into our mental health, coping skills, soft skills, all of those things into our health curriculum. Perfect. And we also provide elective credits for therapeutic fiction writing.
Oh, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. But that could also be an English credit.
True. It can't, because it's creative writing. Mm-hmm. 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 But it can't be core English, but it can still be English credit. But that's a hard one to, sometimes the boundaries between those two things are.
Well, there's some workarounds.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a look at some of the services that might be siloed and non-cooperative services.
Oh,
so that they don't have complete access to. So what would those be?
Well, the one thing that I have been advocating for, so much so that I'm sure people are really tired of hearing my voice on the issue, is the silo that is the biggest silo between the Oregon Department of Education and the Oregon Health Authority. Mm-hmm. Because many families have private insurance, and the services provided for families who have Medicaid are extensive. But the services provided to families that have private insurances, who are in that weird space where they make too much money to get Medicaid, but they don't make enough to pay any deductibles. Mm-hmm. Their students suffer, and everybody's just like, well, we have this contract with the CCO, and they don't really like us to spend our resources helping the other people that don't have Medicaid. So we need to be focused on this contract. And I'm like, I think you need to be focused on the people.
Right.
And the needs of our community. But that's just me. I don't know. I've always been a dreamer. But I do know that I know that finally this year they put together the state level systems of care, because the county level systems of care, I'm just not even going to go there, but the state level of systems of care, I it does have a lot of potential to fill in those gaps and kind of mend these siloed systems, especially even when I talk to them, though, they're like, well, we're just talking about the Oregon Health Authority, inside the Oregon Health Authority. And I'm like, okay, that's great, but let's talk about a little bit, how are we going to meld this together with the Department of Education and the Oregon Health Authority? Because that's where most of the students spend all their day. Why would we not?
Right. And that would, yeah, because
That
why
pretty much
aren't
fix most things
it
with
would
funding.
help.
Yeah.
It would very much help. And then because you're talking about mental health and addictive services.
Well, right. But even if you talk about things for autism, you talk about services.
Mm-hmm.
DHS is in charge of services for direct service professionals, for intellectual and disability, and intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
There's so between the Oregon Department of Education and Oregon Health Authority, if those two things were combined and the resources and the funding were accessible to all students, can you imagine? I mean, I can't even think of any needs that could not be met.
But I can also think that that might generate one giant cluster.
Perhaps, but
But it would be wonderful if it were
yeah.
on a smaller,
But think
on a,
about the
on a smaller
schools that
level.
have school-based health centers.
Yeah,
It works for them.
it certainly does. And so it would seem more beneficial if, say, because you're with McMinnville, if their health and human services that they received there, that they came in and they were able to satellite with you. But if it were on a smaller scale, because I think that once you make something too big of a machine, then you start running into so many problems with it, and too many people trying to be cooks, trying to do different components of it, and everybody saying that they're an expert and trying to take over. But if you have a smaller, right now, the health systems that we have with the schools, the clinics, those are small enough that they're able to do cooperative. The mental health services that are also lined up for families is also small enough. But I think that if you have something that's just too big, where you're doing a partnership where they're running, having one machine here and one machine next to it, and trying to involve maybe even a third machine, you've gotten too big. And so you can kind of lose focus as far as what it is that you're actually doing. And everybody wants to be the engineer who's in charge.
True, but let me. So there was a pipe dream that I had at some point that everybody was saying, let's focus on things that are realistic. And I'm just going to use it as an example. I was serving in the Disability Services Advisory Council, and I went to a quarterly meeting for all the state, and I was talking about how the adult foster homes, you have mental health foster homes, and you have physical health foster homes. And the physical health foster homes are not equipped to handle mental health issues normally, and you have to use physical health funding. And then there's the mental health foster homes that are not usually equipped or trained to handle physical health issues, and you have to use mental health funding. And so basically, people going into foster homes have to figure out which issues are the primary issues, and they get those addressed, and everything else goes to the wayside. And so the issues, I brought those issues up, and finally, they started integrating those two systems. Now there's still two systems and they still run separately, but for the people who have coexisting needs, now they have a liaison from one system on the other, on the other advisory council or whatever you want to call it. They have a liaison from this one that goes to over here. And so they communicate they work together. There's less of a gap in between. And so now if you have a mental health foster home, you can get cross-trained in physical health needs. So like I said, if somebody has diabetes and need insulin shots and you have to have a nurse come do whatever, right? And you can do the same thing in the opposite direction. Well, you can do the same. My thought is, if they can do that in that situation, then you could have a liaison that sits, it understands the workings of the ODE and understands the working of the OHA. And when there are individuals or schools or organizations that need to access both of those resources simultaneously, there's somebody who understands how those integrate,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's only one person.
Right. And a pivot person like that would be invaluable.
Right. And that's what I mean. I don't mean like, let's put these things, reorganize everybody's stuff and start over
Okay.
and reinvent the wheel. But having some kind of a tie between those two so that they're not so completely siloed and separate.
Right.
There's at least some way to combine those services.
Right. And that would be perfect.
Yeah.
It would be a perfect storm, I think.
Mm-hmm. Because that one person, can you imagine if someone like Annie Marges was also part of the Oregon Health Authority system,
mm-hmm.
and knew how both of those things work and how they mesh together and how they can work for the best interest of those students and families.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, that would be, but there's not somebody like that, but
mm-hmm.
eventually there will be, because I'm determined.
Okay.
That's what they said when I said things about the foster care system. They're like, yeah, okay, you keep dreaming. I'm like, I'm just going to keep speaking my piece and being the, squeaky wheel.
Well, that's how you get things done.
Yeah.
You really do. Okay. So let's talk about building supplemental and cooperative systems. Because I think that this is where we can segue, because you're talking about that already.
Yeah. Yes.
So we talk about the advocacy for equity and funding. I don't know, how would you, because you also have growth mindset in this category, and I'm not sure how you advocate for growth mindset, because I think my belief about growth mindset is that it's something that you can develop. I don't know how you would advocate for that. So what is it that you mean by, what is it that you mean?
Well, when you and I were talking about growth mindset before,
mm-hmm.
really it comes down to what we were talking about earlier in this podcast and some of those statements that are inappropriate, so that's the opposite of growth mindset. So if you take those statements and you take the opposite of those statements, like, this is just the way it is, it's always been like this, and there's nothing I can do about
mm-hmm.
it. And then you empower yourself with the knowledge and the skills
mm-hmm.
to do something about things that need to be improved, to learn and to grow, and hopefully to do that together, collaboratively as a community, because in the end, we are all, we're all in this together.
Right.
We all have a lot of the same needs.
And everybody brings their Lego sets of skills together, and they all pitch in, and because you can't really, you need to have a diverse supply of skills and input in order to have a really well-rounded thing that's going to work for everybody, and that you can make sure that, and even then you may not hit every single cog on the wheel.
Well, right. But you have a better chance. I mean, but at the end
mm-hmm.
of the day, if you're learning and you're growing,
right,
and you're doing it together,
mm-hmm.
I mean, isn't that what life is about? I mean, to me,
to make life better for
learning and growing together.
Yeah,
and to make life better, more enjoyable.
Our little Eden.
Huh?
Our little Eden.
Our little, right.
Or utopia. Um,
Well, there's all, I think, too, I think part of what makes an utopia a utopia is that it's not perfect, that there are perfect imperfections, but there are skills to overcome those things. And there's the growth mindset to get past them and to try not to keep making the same mistakes over and over again.
right. Or looking at those mistakes and seeing what worked and what didn't work, and then
Right.
jumping on those, and then it's kind of like a science experiment. I mean, that's pretty much what you do with science, isn't it?
I mean, we're on an adventure,
Exactly. Exactly. So
experimentation adventure.
yeah, yeah. I mean, if you read Deva Sobel and her book on longitude, look at what they went through in order to get there. Um, so tell me about building supplemental and cooperative systems, because you're talking about two, and I love this idea of what you have, this vision of a new program that you have. Do you mind talking about that?
Oh, not at all.
Because I
So
think I think it's a fantastic model.
we would love for it to be a 3 year plan, but I mean, it might be more like a 5 year plan, but we're
Hmm.
hoping, you know, we can have the rosy glasses on for the 3 year plan.
It could be
But
less than that too.
so basically, if you can imagine that you had four buildings, um, and then kind of surrounding each other, and then one right in the middle of all four, right? So there's
Hmm.
one building in the middle, there's four buildings on each side of that,
Hmm.
right? The one in the middle, well, I'm gonna end with the one in the middle. So the one, let's go with building one, would be a building for students, a boarding school, but the boarding would be in building two, obviously, but the school would be in building one,
Okay.
right, for students. And the housing for those students would be in building two, and I'll explain why they might need housing in a few minutes. So then you have building three, that is a recovery community for mental health, for trauma, for addiction, for coexisting conditions,
Hmm.
for parents of those students. And then building four is housing for those parents, right? And now you ask, like, might wonder, well, why are the students and the parents living and going to their programs separately? Well, that's where the fifth one comes in. The fifth building in the middle is for, a lot of parents are separated from their kids. The kids are put into foster care, while the parents are going through their programs and trying to rebuild their life. And in the meantime, everybody is traumatized by that separation.
Hmm.
Then you have to deal with the trauma. And the trauma itself can make it very difficult to get past if there's addictions. So it's just a kind of a vicious negative downward spiral in a lot of situations that doesn't get better for most people.
Right.
And so, how do we address that? So, what if you could have supervised visitation without separating the families completely? Right.
Hmm.
So you have that building in the middle where people come together. They have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They have movie nights. They have game nights. They have classes on parenting classes and communication classes, and relationship counseling and family counseling and all those things that the families need. Family stabilization services, all those
Hmm.
skills they learn, how to be healthy, to they learn how to what is codependency, and what is enabling, and what are boundaries, and what are healthy boundaries, and how to how to compromise, all those things that, frankly, I wish I had learned growing up.
Hmm.
And it would have made my life way better. It would make anybody's life better, but in that situation, then you would have the DHS trained
Hmm.
supervisors, so they can come into that area, and the kids can come into the area, the parents can come into the area, and they're automatically being supervised. So there you go, supervised visitation, and you don't have to go anywhere besides through a door from your home to see your kid. or
Now,
through the door to go see your parent.
are the parents and are the students allowed to work?
Well, I think that would probably be a case by case assessment. If they're in a place in their healing and their recovery where working would be good for their program, then I don't see why there wouldn't be an opportunity to do that. And there probably would be plenty of things to do to make money on the job. I mean, on site
Mm-hmm.
while you're in the program. Because I mean, the best situations you can see that work the best that are out there right now, you take like the homeless camps, the tiny home kind of communities that they have
Mm-hmm.
made for homeless individuals, and they each have a job that they do to contribute to their community, and
Right.
it helps build a sense of self-worth and purpose and all the things that as human beings we need to live and grow and enjoy any kind of moments in life. We have to have those things.
And then at some point, do they transition to outpatient in a
Yes.
sense?
So then there
Sort
would
of.
be transitional services. So then there might be another location where they could maybe go live with their families and have house parents, but they can live with their kids and have even those situations where um, you have nuclear families, and then you have a kind of a combined area, but you have people that are there in case things start falling apart and the it gets to be too overwhelming, and the parent says, I don't know if I can handle all this responsibility or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And I need some support. And instead of judging somebody for just being human, that the transitional services can step in and say, hey, you know what, I'm a peer, I have been where you are, I know what that
Mm-hmm.
dark place feels like, I'm not judging you, let me just be here for you, and
Right.
let's get your kids taken care of while you and I take a walk. Let's talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to throw everything, all the stuff all the progress we've made away, because we just need a break. You need some respite, right? And then you can decide what you want to do from there. But let's take a break first.
It sounds absolutely transformative.
I believe it would be. I do believe that.
And
I think the most of the part. So my husband actually works at a an organization that provides services for people experiencing addiction.
mm-hmm.
He is actually a certified recovery mentor, and we talk about this a lot. And that is, a lot of times people want to put a band-aid on the issues, and a lot of funding goes into those
Yeah.
band-aids. But we don't actually take the band-aid off and look at the wound and treat the wound under the band-aid, and see, like, there's like maybe there's stuff buried into the wound we need to kind of get out of there and clean it and work on it first, and then put the band-aid on there, and then the
Mm-hmm.
band-aid will actually do something, because there's not something under there that's still festering.
Well, it feels as though what they want to do is pretty superficial without getting in there and actually cleaning the wound
Right. And that's
and
temporary. It's
and
not going to
putting
be
something in
permanent.
there so that it can actually heal so the person can be whole again.
Right.
So,
Whole. And that is the main thing. That's why Fifth Corner Academy actually is, we have the whole wellness needs model.
mm-hmm.
And it's expanded from the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But basically, if you think of it as like if you had a pyramid, and no, I'm not talking about anything religious or anything like that, but just like think about the shape of a pyramid, and think about the bottom square, right,
Mm-hmm.
as the base self.
Right.
Then you have the corners, which are the corners of wellness needs. Um, the basic ones connected to basic survival. So you have the social, emotional, physical, and mental wellness needs that
Mm-hmm.
are those four corners at the bottom, right? So
Right.
then if you can meet those basic needs, and my son says it best, actually, it's a Minecraft reference. If you can, I'll tell you that in a second, but if you can meet those basic needs, you start rising up those slopes with personal growth, and you can actually, the fifth corner is
Hmm.
the corner at the
The
top of the
peak.
pyramid, the peak, the apex, the connection to your true self and beyond the self if you have that inclination. So it can be spiritual awareness. But when we say spiritual health and spiritual wellness and spiritual needs, we're talking about the connection to the self and potentially beyond the self with that inclination. So,
Hmm.
but the true self, this is the base self. The apex is the true self,
Got it.
right? Without all of the defense mechanisms that we employ when we are living in survivor mode
Right.
as human beings, as
Hmm.
every human being, not just ones that are experiencing so-called mental health challenges. These are just human being
Right.
um,
And and
experiences.
and for many of us, those are the students that we deal with on a daily basis,
Absolutely.
as well as their families at home, because it's sort of a reinfection every time that they go back through those doors, because the parents, there's something going on with them, and they, it's a cyclical kind of,
Yeah.
whoops. Um,
Research has proven that it's a cycle,
yeah.
and it's generation after generation after generation. So if we know that this is going on and we know it's repeating itself every generation,
Hmm.
then obviously what we've been doing is not working. I mean, it
Right.
doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that one out, right? What we're doing is not working. So what would work? And
Right.
that's the growth mindset that we're talking about. Okay, so if this
Exactly.
is not working, let's put our heads together. Let's figure out why isn't it working and what would work.
Hmm.
And if we figure out what would work, then how could we make that happen if we work together instead of worrying about like the, what do you call that, competition mindset. That's just
Yeah.
honestly, that has no place in our world anymore.
Well, I think competition is actually good, because what it does is it makes us want to do things better. And if
Well,
we
right,
see
like,
people, I mean, we can work with people, but there's always, if you don't feel as though you're competing with somebody, then sometimes there's really, for some people, there's no need to do that.
well, maybe, but
So I
I
think,
feel like,
I don't
if
want
you
to
compete
discount that.
against your if I'm a better person than I today than I was yesterday, then I was competing against somebody, competing
Right.
about but what
And
I'm talking about is the kind of competition that takes priority. Like, so basically, I don't want to send you to this person over here that I know this therapist will exactly meet your needs, but I don't want to send you to her because I want your money.
see, I think when you conflate ego with competition, that's where you run into the problem.
Fair point. Fair
But if you,
point.
because you should not, when we're dealing with children, we should not be doing that. We should take our ego out of the equation. I know too many people who are so into their ego and how much they believe that they are affecting, rather than dealing with and working on with the kid. It's more about them than it is the kid. Okay. I'm going to wrap it up. And it was fantastic having you. And I want to thank you so much. And if people are heading off to St. Louis around the 19th of October for the National Alternative Education Association Conference, they will catch you. They will catch Annie Marges. And you will also be able to listen to Dr. Letitia Woodley, who's one of the big keynote speakers. And, oh, you'll love her. You will. I just wish that I could go. So I will say thank you. And to all of our listeners, we will see you next week. Check the show notes. We have a lot more down there for you. And adios.